What is going on, everybody? Shwazy here, and in today's video we're going to talk 5 reasons why the 6th gen Ford Bronco is a great daily driver and 3 reasons why it's not. Okay, so here is my 6th generation 2021 Ford Bronco, and for those of you that haven't followed along with the channel, I actually took delivery of this vehicle brand new from the showroom floor back in July of 2021. Kind of crazy to believe that it's been almost 3 years since I took delivery of this vehicle, and just so my audience is aware, this is a week 2 production build, so this was a very early version of the Ford Bronco. So if there were going to be any issues, it would be evident on this particular vehicle, and we'll talk more about that later on in the video. Now, if you guys haven't followed along the channel, I have made a 1, 2, and I will be making a 3-year update video on this particular vehicle, so hit that subscribe button so you guys can stay tuned for all of the videos on this particular vehicle. I'm pushing just shy of 30,000 miles, so it's been about 10,000 miles a year over the last 3 years, and the purpose of today's video is to explain whether this is a good daily driver, because personally I've been daily driving it for pretty much the last 3 years, and given the fact that I've started seeing a lot more of these on the roads today, I wanted to do a video to explain whether this really is a good daily driver or if you should consider something else. Because I feel like the majority of people that buy this vehicle are likely not going to take this thing off-roading, which is perfectly fine. It's a cool looking vehicle, it has a cool brand behind it, and just because you're not close to an off-road trail doesn't mean that you should be judged for not off-roading this vehicle. But I do want to explain how the daily drivability is a little bit impacted by the fact that this is intended to be an off-roader. So today we're going to break it down into 8 different categories, 5 of which this thing does really well at in terms of daily drivability, and 3 which don't do so well. So let's kick things off with reliability. I'm going to start things off under the hood because generally when people discuss reliability they talk engine and transmission, and I will be the first to say this engine has been rock solid. Now, my particular big bend trim level Ford Bronco comes with the base 2.3 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. It produces just around 300 horsepower and 325 pound-feet of torque on premium fuel, and this engine has been used in other models. The reason that's important is because this Ford Bronco is not the very first vehicle to have this engine. The Ford Mustang had it, the Ford Focus ST had it, and this has been a pretty rock-solid engine overall. Yes, there have been some complaints about it, but overall, this has been a pretty durable engine in a lot of Ford products. And if you actually take a look at the NHTSA website, when it comes to customer complaints and factory recalls, there have been really no complaints or recalls associated with this engine. The same goes for the 10-speed automatic transmission. They've pretty much used this transmission on every other automatic transmission vehicle in Ford's lineup. Never had any issues with it shifting or being clunky or anything like that. It's been great from the very beginning, and even though 30,000 miles isn't a great indicator of reliability, like I mentioned earlier, this is a week 2 production build, so if there were going to be issues or minor headaches, that would be evident in this vehicle, and I've had no engine and no transmission issues since I took delivery of this vehicle. Now, I do apologize for how dusty it is under the hood. This thing gets dusty very quickly, even just driving in day-to-day traffic, but I have taken this vehicle off-roading, and I think most of that dirt kind of builds up from there. But when it comes to the engine transmission, they are solid choices. Now, there is another engine option, the 2.7 liter turbocharged V6 offered on the higher trim levels, or optional on this particular big bend trim level, and there have been more issues with that engine. But it's specific to one particular year. Back in 2021, there was a defective intake valve in the Ford Broncos equipped with that EcoBoost engine. And since then, Ford has resolved the issue, but of course, with social media and just kind of the panic that ensues online, people continue to bring up the 2.7 liter as a faulty engine and one you should not get. Well, all of those issues have been resolved, and the 2.7 liter has also been pretty reliable overall. Both those engines, the 2.3 and the 2.7 liter, have been used in other models. And the reason this is important is because this Ford Bronco is not a ground-up new construction type of vehicle. They actually utilize a lot of the Ford Ranger components underneath, including the engine, including the subframe, and so you can take comfort in the fact that this isn't a new experiment. This is essentially a Ford Ranger with a Ford Bronco body on top, and that kind of adds to the durability. And even if you pick a 2021 early model year version like the one on the screen in front of you, you can be pretty comfortable with the reliability. Now, there have been a couple minor issues that I've had with this vehicle, but those really pertain to the build quality. One of the first ones that I've talked about time and time again in every single video is these frameless windows. So as you can see, when I open the door, the window rolls down a little bit, and then when I close it, it rolls back up. So there's a mechanism here, so as soon as you open the door, it's supposed to roll down so that you don't shatter the window when you're opening it. Well, there have been times, most recently as of last week, where this window on the driver's side in the rear wouldn't actually roll down when I opened the door. And so because of that, it would get caught on this rubber lip over here, and then when I closed the door, it would actually stay a little bit pushed out, so it'd almost be at a little bit of an angle, and I was worried that it would actually shatter the window if I continued to do that. So what I ended up doing was rolling down the window just about a 1/4 inch just to allow this to clear this rubber seal. I didn't really notice any additional wind noise. There was no water getting in because you still have this rubber seal at the top, but it was just enough that I wouldn't damage my window. That's really been the main build quality issue that I've had with this vehicle. Again, not really attributed to reliability, but more so just kind of a little headache that you have to deal with. Now, there are some fixes for this, and I've actually used them in the past when I had issues with the passenger window. Same problem, by the way. There is a system where you can actually hold down the automatic windows for about 5 seconds. Once it reaches the bottom, you continue to hold it for another 5 seconds. Then you hold it up for another 5 seconds, and that should kind of reset or resolve the system. Now, that worked for me on the passenger side. It didn't necessarily work for me here, but when I took this to the Ford dealership, they did that fix for me, and I've had no problems ever since. So owning a Ford Bronco, you kind of just got to get used to these frameless windows being a little bit of an issue. The other build quality issue I've had recently has to do with the software on my 8-inch touchscreen display, specifically when it pertains to Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. I have talked about this in other videos, but oftentimes I have the screen kind of freeze up and glitch, and I can't actually manipulate any of the screens or even exit Android Auto without having to reboot the vehicle. Now, some of you viewers have actually pointed out a good reset button. So if you actually hold the power button and the skip seek track button at the same time for a couple seconds, it will reset this software. And this reset will generally fix any issues I've had. And I kind of have to do that about once a day in order for it to actually work. So as you can see, it just rebooted it, and then it will fix itself. But those are really the two main build quality issues I've had with this vehicle. Other than that, reliability has been fantastic and actually impressed me for a week 2 production build. Now, the next category that I think is very important for a daily driver is kind of in the name. Can you actually drive it every day? We're talking every different type of condition, whether you're running to the grocery store or going up the canyon, whether it's raining or snowing, or if it's in the heat of summer, can you drive this vehicle every day? And to answer that question, you most definitely can. In fact, I've done it in all sorts of different conditions, from the lowest temperatures below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, going up through a canyon while it's been snowing, through a blizzard, all the way up to like 105-degree temperatures, driving around the city without any problems. The one thing this car has always done is turn on without a problem, and it has a very strong heater and a very strong air conditioner. Now, that being said, if you are sitting in the second row, there are no air vents back there aside from the footwells, which are almost inexistent air vents. I'm actually talking about air vents that you can actually feel on your face. There aren't any in the second row, no matter what trim level you get. And because of that, it does get a little bit warm in the second row because of that soft top and the lack of air vents. And because of that, even though the air conditioning is very powerful in the first row, you don't get much of that airflow in the second row. That's one complaint I have in terms of daily drivability. But other than that, this thing is a badass in the snow. I've driven it through conditions that no other car was able to go through because the snow was so tall. And then in the summertime, you almost get a convertible-like feel because you can open up that roof and get that wind in your hair feeling that you don't necessarily get from really any other car out there aside from like a Jeep Wrangler or a drop top convertible. And it's incredibly easy to do that. You simply just pull on this handle over here on the driver's side, and then there's another one on the passenger side, and then you can slide your finger in here and lift this roof up, and it slides open. And with this one not having this crossbar above the passenger and driver side, it's actually located behind the second row, you have this large open roof. And I've actually taken this to a canyon and reclined these seats all the way back, grabbed some popcorn, and actually did some stargazing, pretty much laying inside my Ford Bronco without having to really get outside of the vehicle, just because this opening is so massive. I love that they do that here as compared to the Wrangler, where the Wrangler actually has a crossbar that kind of gets in the way of your view. That's one of my favorite features of this particular vehicle and adds to the daily drivability of this car year round. Now, the next category that makes a good daily driver, in my opinion, is low maintenance costs, because there's nothing worse than having an expensive daily driver that also costs you an arm and a leg when you're taking it in for service, even if it's just a routine oil change. Well, that's where it's actually really good when it comes to the Ford Bronco. And another category where this thing excels, the maintenance costs on this thing is actually pretty low. Every single time I've taken it into my Ford dealer, it's probably about a $75 job to do a typical oil change, wheel rotation, you know, filter check, stuff like that. It is really not that expensive when you compare it to like Toyotas, Hondas. It's right in line with the competition. Also, a lot of dealerships offer packages. So if you buy like 3 oil changes in one package, you'll probably be able to save even more money than the $75 that I pay every single time I go. Another thing I will mention, and I'm not quite sure if Ford continues to do this, but with every new purchase of a Ford Bronco back in 2021, you were given Ford Pass rewards points. And because I was a very early reservation holder, and because of the delays in getting this vehicle out for production, I actually got like a bonus Ford Pass rewards points. And so that money or those rewards points can be used towards anything at a Ford dealer, including service. So for the last 2.5 or so years that I've been going in every 5,000 miles for an oil change, I've typically used my Ford Pass rewards points to pay for all those services. So it's quite a good incentive to buy a new vehicle, because they typically throw that money into your Ford Pass rewards account, and you can use that for anything from buying accessories to typical oil changes. Now, the other maintenance costs, of course, you're gonna have to worry about is changing your tires. And these are the 35-inch Goodyear Wrangler Territory mud terrain tires, and they're really not meant for daily driving. I mean, they're more so meant for off-roading, but like I said, I do daily drive them. And so these tend to wear a little bit quicker on the highways and in day-to-day traffic. And I've actually had to replace 2 of them already. The other 2 have actually been fine. It was honestly due to an alignment issue I had, not necessarily due to wear and tear. But nonetheless, if you are planning on replacing these tires probably every 20 or 30,000 miles, you're going to be paying about $250 a tire. So it's really not unreasonable that maybe once every 3 years you're going to pay about $1,000 plus installation to get these tires replaced. Again, in terms of cost, that's really not out of the norm from a typical crossover SUV. Now, the next category that makes for a good daily driver is features and amenities. And the Ford Bronco does really well in that category. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now, one of my favorite features is this particular Ford Bronco Big Bend with the mid package comes with remote start. And I have used this feature so many times, especially in the winter time. So the nice thing is it's on the key, so you can never lose this functionality, but you simply hit the lock button once and then click this button down here twice, and the vehicle will start remotely. And it is a game changer in cold winter mornings. Now, the other big advantage here is the Ford Pass app. It is a free application that you have on your phone where you can control everything from the locks to the remote start. You can see what your service records have been. You can look at what your mileage is, where the vehicle is located, and all of that is baked into one application, and you never have to pay for it. That is a huge advantage, because a lot of competitors offer this type of feature, but you actually have to pay either a monthly subscription charge, or they don't really give you that much functionality. Ford, on the other hand, gives you a lot of features baked into that application. And I've used the remote start using my phone because sometimes I am a little bit further away than the key can actually reach, and so it's been nice to be able to warm up the car, cool it down when I'm further away and I'm going to be heading towards my vehicle. So kudos to Ford for creating some great software integration. All right, for the next set of features and amenities, let's jump inside and turn this vehicle on. Now, I showed this off a little bit earlier, but you do have an 8-inch touchscreen as standard. You can get upwards of a 12-inch touchscreen on some of the higher trim levels. And then you have this, I would say about 7 or so inch gauge cluster display, and it's also partially digital, partially analog, and it's got some cool stuff baked in here as well. So you can go through your different off-road pages, you can pull up your navigation, you can set your favorites, your audio controls, and depending on what drive mode you're in, yes, you do have different drive modes in this vehicle, which is definitely an advantage. It will also change what the gauge cluster looks like. So cool amenities there. Now, my particular vehicle does not have the heated steering wheel option, but it is leather wrapped, and you can get a heated steering wheel on some of the higher trim levels. But this vehicle comes with wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto on every single trim level, which is fantastic. Even some new vehicles don't offer wireless capability. You also have heated seats here, and like I may have mentioned earlier, this is the most powerful heated seats I've experienced in any vehicle. And I've been fortunate enough to review a lot of vehicles. None of them have the strength of these heated seats. I mean, you can essentially boil your butt by putting this on the 3rd setting, but it is so welcome when you have the roof open and it's a little bit of a brisker winter day, or if you're driving in 0-degree temperatures, those heated seats are fantastic. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the basics like your air conditioning and your heater work fantastically well here. Very powerful heater and air conditioning system. And then there's other amenities here too, like you've got some USB ports located back here that you can plug in different devices, including a wireless charging pad if you like it to. Some of the higher trim levels come with a wireless charging pad as standard. You also have your different functionality here for your 4 high, 4 low, and you have your 2 high. Some of the higher trim levels also have a 4 auto. You got a downhill cruise control. Also, my particular vehicle comes with the lane keep assist option, so it won't actually center you in the lane, but if it notices you're veering left and right, this thing will notify you on the gauge cluster display, and it will allow you to be a little bit more focused when you're daily driving your Bronco. Also, my particular vehicle comes with the blind spot monitoring, which is a very welcome feature, even though you have a pretty good view out of your blind spot because your windows are pretty large. It is still very nice considering this car is a little bit larger than some of your average vehicles on the road today. Now, in terms of second row features and amenities, there's really not too much to discuss back here, but I will mention the fact that you do have latch anchors on the driver and the passenger side, none in the middle seat. You also don't have a second row armrest, but it is a pretty comfortable place to sit. You've got pretty decent legroom back here. You've also got automatic window controls over here, one touch up and down. You've got 2 USB ports, and you've got a household power outlet, which has come really in handy on the beach. I've actually used an air compressor to plug into this outlet to inflate some inflatables for like the swimming pool. So overall, a very usable second row seat where you can easily fit at least 4 individuals inside of the cabin. Now, the last category where the Ford Bronco excels in terms of daily drivability is horsepower or passing power. Now, I've made videos about this in the past. Mine's only the entry-level 2.3 liter EcoBoost. You get this on pretty much every single Ford Bronco, and then you can opt to the more expensive 2.7 liter V6. But honestly, I don't think it's necessary. This 2.3 liter is plenty quick. Like I said, I've been fortunate enough to review a lot of vehicles, and a lot of 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinders are kind of weak. You're asking for a little bit more power, but in this setup with about 300 horsepower on premium gasoline, this thing has plenty of passing power, especially once you get a little bit past that turbo lag, which really is only up to like 3,000 RPM. After that, this thing actually pulls really strong. I'm gonna throw up a link to a video that I discuss all of the details about this particular engine and its passing power capabilities, but I honestly would recommend the 2.3 liter over the 2.7. I've driven both. I took the 2.7 liter on the Bronco Off-Rodeo, and it's an even quicker engine. But if you're shopping between the two and you don't think this is powerful enough, you're going to be mistaken. Even with these 35-inch wheels and tires that are pretty heavy, along with that lifted suspension with the Bilsteins, I've never had any acceleration issues with this particular vehicle. Now, in hotter temperatures like it is today, where it hits almost 100 degrees, it gets a little bit more sluggish than cooler temperatures, but that's pretty much every engine. In colder temperatures, naturally aspirated and even forced induction engines like the one behind me do really well, and hotter temperatures just aren't the best for them. But this thing, even in the highest temperatures, performs extremely well, and I could easily pass people on the freeway with just adding a little bit of gas. This thing feels peppier than most 4-cylinder turbocharged engines I've experienced in the past, including the 2.7 liter turbocharged engine that Chevy uses in its Colorado and its Sierra. I think this thing is even quicker, even though its displacement is a little bit smaller. I think it's tuned just right. Okay, now that we've discussed the 5 categories that it does well in as being a daily driver, let's talk about the 3 categories where it kind of falls flat. Now, one of the categories that makes for a good daily driver is good gas mileage, because you generally want to fill up a little bit less to be able to save a little bit more money. Well, that's where this vehicle doesn't really do that well. So I'm gonna pull up the menu where I show you my MPG. As you can see here, I've been averaging about 18.5 miles per gallon. And I would say this is probably 70% highway, 30% city. So this is one of the better cases in terms of MPG. Now, when I had smaller wheels and tires, because this vehicle actually came with about 32.5-inch tires out of the factory, I was getting somewhere around 19, 20 MPG. So I've lost about 1.5 MPG when I upgraded to the larger tires. But even still, 19.3 over, the last 8,000 or so miles is not that great, especially when you consider a lot of crossovers nowadays are getting high 20s, low 30s. High teens really isn't ideal, but you kind of expect that when you're driving in an off-road vehicle with large 35-inch tires and about 13 or so inches of ground clearance. Now, the next daily driver category that I feel the Ford Bronco falls a little bit short has to do with the storage capacity. Now, there's a couple things to unpack here. First off, in terms of the entry into the trunk. Since mine is the soft top, it doesn't have any type of glass that will retract up to give me a larger opening. So the largest opening in normal day-to-day use is this little box over here, which is definitely larger than that in the Wrangler, but it's still not ideal for loading large objects. Like your typical storage boxes won't really fit here without you having to open up this area. Now, you can expand this entryway by opening up these flaps here and over here, and by doing so you can open up a pretty good amount of space into the trunk area, but still not as much space as your typical, lift gate on a crossover. Now, in terms of the storage capacity here, your trunk floor seems to be a little bit smaller than your typical crossover. I actually used to own a 2018 Toyota RAV4 before I owned this vehicle, and I felt like I could fit more objects into the trunk floor than I can in the Bronco. Funny enough, the cargo volume in the trunk area is actually a little bit larger than your Toyota RAV4. So Ford says you have 38.3 cubic feet of space behind that second row as compared to a Toyota RAV4, which has about 37.6 cubic feet of space. But I think Ford is really gaining that cubic feet of storage in this upper area. It's a little bit of a taller vehicle for sure than the Toyota RAV4. And so what you lose in terms of your trunk floor, you gain in terms of height. And I've actually been able to store some pretty tall objects in the back as long as I could fit them through this somewhat small opening. You kind of have to angle things in, and then you can put it up here. Now, you'll definitely have a little bit of a better access if you choose the hard top, but personally I like the soft top because it's easier to open from the front row, and it also allowed me to get this vehicle quicker. But even if you do have the hard top with the glass panel, it's not the largest trunk floor. The other thing to point out back here is the width of this trunk floor is just shy of 4 feet, and that's a problem because a lot of objects are about 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. I'm talking sheetrock or plywood. If you ever run to a department store to do some home remodeling projects, you'll find that the lack of about 2 inches is really annoying when you're trying to load items back here. Now, you may be arguing that even if this was 4 foot wide, you probably couldn't fit 8 foot long objects back here, because even if you fold down the second row, which is pretty easy to do by pushing on this headrest button and pulling on this handle to lower the second row, it's still not long enough to fit an 8 foot long objects into the trunk area. And you would be correct. However, if the width of the trunk floor was 4 feet, I could easily put longer items that would just sit on this third brake light and kind of angle down into the first row seats. So it would have been really nice to have a 4 foot wide opening, but unfortunately Ford is just a couple inches shy. And so if you do make constant trips to get some larger or wider items in the back, you're just not going to be able to fit them inside of the Bronco. Now, that being said, you do have more cargo volume behind the first row in the Ford Bronco than your typical compact crossover. Ford says you have about 83 cubic feet of space behind the first row versus 69.8 cubic feet of space in your RAV4. Now, in terms of closed storage, this is kind of where it falls short again. You have a very small area located underneath the trunk floor, but other than that, there's not much more closed storage inside the vehicle. Even in your door panels, you don't actually have any type of door pockets or anything like that. You have this net over here on the driver and passenger side for the first and second row. So really, your only closed storage is your center arm console, where you can actually lock it and put items in here, and it's kind of deep but nothing out of the ordinary. And then you have your glove compartment, but other than that, there's no unique storage compartments located inside of the Ford Bronco. Now, the last and arguably most important daily driver category is ride quality and comfort. And that is where, unfortunately, the Ford Bronco shows its biggest weakness. This is not a comfortable car to drive in every single day. Now, let me unpack what I'm talking about here before the comments go crazy. I'm talking about the Ford Bronco in comparison with like your typical crossover, like a Kia Telluride, Toyota RAV4, the list goes on. A unibody construction crossover is going to be much more comfortable, much quieter on the inside to daily drive than any Ford Bronco. Regardless of whether you have the hard top or the soft top, every single Ford Bronco is going to drive worse, it's going to ride rougher, and it's going to be louder than your typical crossover. Now, when you compare it to other off-road vehicles like a Wrangler, which this competes closest to, or maybe like a 4Runner or something like that, then this is on par, if not a little bit more comfortable than the Jeep Wrangler. I've driven a Jeep Wrangler. It wanders on the road. It's not a very comfortable vehicle by any stretch of the imagination. So compared to other off-roaders, this vehicle is great. It's perfectly fine. But for those of you that are switching from a crossover, you may be a little bit surprised with the amount of road noise that's coming into the cabin, the harshness of the ride. Also, when you're driving on the freeway, you cannot have any type of Bluetooth phone conversation with anybody, at least using the built-in microphone inside of the vehicle. Perhaps if you plug in your AirPods or your Buds or whatever you use, maybe you can have a conversation, but if you're the type of person that oftentimes is on the road and having phone calls for work or to talk with your kids or wife or whatever, you really just can't do that on the freeway. It gets way too loud on the inside. Now, when I picked up this car, I came from a RAV4 and I kind of expected all of that because my wife used to have a Jeep Wrangler and it was very loud on the inside and not very comfortable. And I will say this car is much more comfortable and much quieter than my wife's 2005 Jeep Wrangler. But in comparison to my RAV4, it was definitely louder. Now, I did do a comparison video where I actually looked at how loud the decibels were in the RAV4 versus the soft top Bronco, and surprisingly, there wasn't that big of a difference. But over the last 3 years of daily driving this car, mostly on the highway, it does kind of start getting to you in terms of annoying you and, you know, kind of disrupting your zen when you're trying to commute to and from work. It's loud. There's no way around it. There's just not as much insulation inside of the Bronco because the doors come off, the roof comes off. I mean, it's such a wide open, cool air experience that you're gonna have to have compromises, and that's one of them. The other compromise is the fact that this suspension is built for off-roading. It's not built for going over, you know, speed bumps or potholes or imperfections in the road. It's meant for low speed, driving over some big ruts. You know, it's meant to keep the car steady in those types of conditions. And lastly, the fact is that these tires, these 35-inch mud terrain tires, are not meant for driving 75 plus miles per hour every single day. They're meant for off-road use. And so you're gonna be better off picking the non-Sasquatch package Bronco, which I did have before I upgraded these wheels and tires, because those are more of an all-terrain tire and are meant for driving on the freeways. This one is louder. Mud terrains are just naturally louder no matter which vehicle you put them on. And so because of that, you really do suffer from a daily drivability standpoint when it comes to comfort and ride quality. So here we are driving over some train tracks. You can see, I mean, you can hear the entire vehicle kind of shaking because everything is so open, there's really not much insulation, and so everything kind of shakes on the inside, regardless of how slowly you try to drive over these speed bumps. Now, we're about to drive over a pretty bad road imperfection here in Utah that I hit pretty much every single day, and it really does get annoying when you're driving over the speed bump, but maybe you can see on camera what it looks like. I mean, that's bad in any car, but it's definitely even worse in the Bronco. But as we're about to enter onto the freeway, I'll give you my final thoughts on the daily drivability of this vehicle, and you can also hear what it sounds like going 70 plus miles per hour on the highway. So here's an example of the acceleration. It's 85 degrees. We're about 65 miles per hour. There's a car in front of me, so it's hard for me to do a full acceleration. Here we are on the freeway, and you might be able to tell I'm kind of having to scream at you for you to be able to hear me, or at least for me to be able to hear myself talk. When I'm on the freeway, I do have to turn up the volume on any phone conversation I do happen to have, and then listening to like podcasts or radio, you kind of have to crank it up quite a bit. But to wrap things up, is this a good daily driver? Well, I can't say it really is, but it's not a bad daily driver either. I mean, it does really well in 5 of the 8 categories that I believe make up a good daily driver. Now, would you be better off daily driving a Honda CR-V or a Nissan Rogue? Yeah, probably. But are you gonna have even a quarter of as much fun as you would in the Bronco? Absolutely not. This thing is a blast. Not because you have to consistently take it off-road to have fun in it, or take the doors and roof off to enjoy everything it offers. no, just sitting in this car and driving it, it's a fun experience. The way your seating position is at, you're pretty much above the road, you have a commanding view, you have a cool looking interior, you know people appreciate your vehicle. Even though it's been out for 3 years, every time I go to get a service done or have to tell anybody about what car I'm driving, whenever I say I have a Ford Bronco, everybody's like, oh wow, that's an awesome car. Everybody appreciates this car. They know the brand. It has a very strong brand presence, and it's a fun car to drive. It feels like a giant toy. And even though it's got some pretty big imperfections, when you compare it to other off-roaders, this thing is on par, if not better, in most categories. The fact that this has an independent front suspension makes it much easier to drive on the freeways than a Jeep Wrangler. I've reviewed quite a few different Jeep Wranglers, and none of them have been as comfortable as this vehicle. Even though it's high up off the ground and it can be windy, I never feel that in my steering. Now, I have a feeling those of you that are watching this video have probably already convinced yourself that you want one, and you're probably not cross-shopping this with a typical crossover. You're simply just looking for affirmation as to why this is a good daily driver. So this is a video, at least the first part, that you could show to your wife to convince them that this is a perfectly good car to daily drive, take your kids to soccer practice, and if need be, take it on a road trip. But what are your thoughts on the Ford Bronco? Would you use this as a daily driver? Perhaps you're using it already. Let me know your thoughts and comments and experiences down in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed this video, I really appreciate if you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly car videos, everything from car reviews to updates on the vehicles that I own. Also, check me out on all the social media at Shwazy_. Until next time, everybody, I hope you stay Shwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day. I'm going to keep daily driving this in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the freeway.